Good evening and welcome to Beyond the Front Page, a show brought to you by Community College for the fall 2024 semester here at the college. That's shown on Spectrum, Verizon Fios, as well as ARMA, the Auburn Regional Media Access, and Win 89.1, the college's radio station. I'm your host, Guy Cosentino. Over the last 18 months, there have been a lot of talk about MICRON, the new chip manufacturing operation that's planned in Clay. Often in those conversations, everyone says the same statement. This is New York's new Erie Canal moment. The canal was built 200 years ago, so we're in the bicentennial of its building. That was led by then Governor Clinton Dewitt. For those who may not remember its history, we do have two experts in the studio today to talk about the Erie Canal, what they do at the museum that if you have not visited, you should, right across from City Hall in Syracuse. A great resource for our community in the history of this region. So we have someone who's familiar, maybe not in her Erie Canal hat, but Natalie Stenson, who was with the Seward House, is now the Erie Canal Museum's executive director. She's been the director for about 9 years. And we have Derrick Pratt, their director of education and public programs, to talk about the 200th anniversary, and then we'll get to maybe that gingerbread thing that you do in a couple weeks. So welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So the basics. Everyone, we'll get to the MICRON connection, but it does come up quite often. I'm not sure that the Erie Canal has gotten so much attention in the last 20 years in this area, but for the MICRON, which is unfair because the Erie Canal is important. I know you weren't there, but can you give us the basics of the Erie Canal?
I think. The canal was constructed 1817 to 1820, connecting Buffalo on Lake Erie, and therefore all the greater upper Great Lakes, to the Hudson River at Albany, and therefore to the Atlantic Ocean. It's really the first efficient pass through the Appalachian Mountains. When it's constructed, it makes the voyage from Buffalo to New York City go from taking about 30 days to about 5 to 7 days, and shipping costs are cut from about $100 a ton to less than $10. So it's this revolutionary moment for upstate New York that sees it really become the Empire State in a lot of ways.
So a couple pieces on this. I know it's in phases. There are some iterations that go later in generations, but let's go back to just the 1800s. This is a sea change for commerce.
Yes.
In the sense of getting your goods if you're a farmer in Buffalo and want to get it to New York City.
Yeah, space and time has pretty much shrunk enormously. We often compare it to the internet at the time and all the implications of that. Things are moving faster and more cheaply than they ever have before, and they can go farther than ever before too. You can get all the way to Minnesota by boat now.
And what does it do to, we now follow the thruway path, and in many places along the thruway you can see the canal.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
What does it do to the communities? Obviously we've got a port in Port Barn. No play on words there, but we do have in Port Barn. We have Camillus, what we were talking on before, Lockport. What does it do to those communities in those regions in the early 1800s?
I mean, a lot of those towns don't even exist prior to the canal. Places like Port Byron, it's Port Byron because it's a port on the Erie Canal. Same with Weedsport as well. Where our museum is in Syracuse, there were 250 settlers living there prior to the canal. Within a decade, there are about 10,000-ish. By the end of the century, 100,000 people. It really jumpstarts industry and settlement.
And so it is started where? Where's the first shovel go?
First shovels July 4th, 1817 in Rome.
Okay, and which way are they going?
Both ways, actually. So
Okay.
They start in the middle. It's the easiest bit to build, and they're able to connect the Mohawk and Seneca rivers. So if the state ever decided to, give up, they'd still have connected to important waterways and stuff.
And the governor at the time was Governor Dewitt, am I correct?
Dewitt Clinton.
Okay, so when is Clinton Dewitt, when is he governor, and who came up with this idea?
That's a $1 million question there.
Oh, okay.
Not when he's governor, that much we know.
Yeah, I know when he's governor.
Well, because
but,
if you're in the 7th grade
Yep.
Yeah.
or in the 4th grade, you know it's Clinton's ditch.
Yes.
maybe the only thing that anybody ever remembers besides the song, and I'm not going to have you sing it here. So, whose idea is it?
Well, so the Mohawk River Valley, just so people understand, is this incredibly unique passageway through the Appalachian Mountains, only point between Georgia and Maine, along with the Champlain Valley, under 600 feet in elevation. So as long as humans have been here, people have been using that waterway and this route to get between the interior of the country and the East Coast. Started with the Haudenosaunee, starting in like the early 1700s. British colonial administrators kind of recognized it and were like, we could improve this waterway. But it's not really until the 1790s, Elkanah Watson, who's this kind of get-rich-quick schemer, teams up with Philip Schuyler, Alexander Hamilton's father-in-law. They create a
There's a musical about that.
yes,
Not the canal part, but
you may have heard of the other guy.
I have heard of the other guy.
They make a private corporation that tries to build small canals.
So this
and
was
locks.
a money-making operation. It was not a government operation at first.
The 1790s company is, yeah. But
Okay.
it does horribly because they
Dynamic.
don't have the money to
So
do it.
capital's important.
Yes.
Okay.
And at this point in American history, no one has the capital to really make it work. Plus, also when it's a private corporation, they're cutting corners to provide value for their shareholders. So they make locks out of wood instead of stone. You know, the wood rots out every 5 years, so they have to replace them and spend more money. It's very short-sighted. But 1810-ish, there starts to be momentum within the state, led at first by a few lesser-known politicians, but they enlist this really important figure in New York's Democratic Republican establishment, DeWitt Clinton, to kind of become its champion. And he takes it over the top in 1817. He's elected governor that year, and that's also when they start building the Erie Canal.
So when is the first iteration finished? You know, I said it was the 200th anniversary this year because I've seen
Yep,
some.
1825.
So 1825, you're celebrating the 200th for the finishing, and that is the main piece that people know about, but that is not what they see today. So there are iterations along the way, correct?
Yep.
Who does that, and why do they do that?
Well, Derrick will interrupt me at any moment because he knows
Okay.
all this better than he's got a whole talk he can give you for 45
Okay.
minutes about. You said
We'll
the
have him back on.
You said the basics of the Erie Canal, and I was like, that's literally the name of a talk that he gives. Pretty much the moment that this canal is completed by 1825, they start to realize it's too small. It's not like
So how wide is it originally?
40 feet wide and 4 feet deep.
Okay, so very shallow.
Yeah, and completely dug by hand.
Okay.
There was black powder by this point, so when they needed to get through the Niagara Escarpment, which is the solid wall of rock in Lockport, New York now, they had black powder that they could use to help explode the rock, but there wasn't even dynamite yet. So 40 feet wide, 4 feet deep was a pretty impressive feat to be done by hand, but it's not big enough. It's popular, it's being used, and so construction begins on the enlargement within a decade of the canal being open.
Okay.
And so when you look at historic pictures of the canal, those pictures are what we now call the enlarged canal. And that's what continued to exist until 1918 is when our current canal system, so the Erie Canal
So the one you
still
see
exists.
now along the thruway,
Right.
it's still the same path though.
It largely, not entirely.
Okay.
With the enlargement, they straightened it out a little bit. And with the barge canal, when that opened in 1918, it is no longer fully a man-made ditch. They're now incorporating natural bodies of water, so the Mohawk River has been canalized. And so the canal used to run in the banks of the Mohawk River, and now the canal is just in the Mohawk River.
So how wide is it? If you said it was 40 feet originally?
Yeah. Then it went to
It's
70.
70, okay, because it's clearly not 70 if you're looking across.
Now 120.
Okay. And is the canal still, besides tourism and recreational, because that's a different category, and I want to get to that in a second, is the canal still used for commercial purposes?
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is, well, not a whole lot, but so last year, less than 1% of lockages were used for commercial traffic. However, that was a significant increase over the previous year's lockages for commercial traffic. A lot of the commercial traffic is over on the eastern parts of the canal, and now I'm talking about the entire New York State Canal system, which includes more than just the Erie branch. We're getting real technical here.
Okay.
So the Erie branch is the east-west vein that goes across the whole state. There's also the Champlain Canal that goes north up to Lake Champlain, the Oswego Canal that starts right about here.
So
and goes
those
up
who
to
just
Lake
think the
Ontario.
Erie Canal is just one straight line from Buffalo to Albany
Yeah.
and then down the Hudson, it has grown and branched off and fingers everywhere.
It's actually smaller now than it has. Like there was a point during the canal boom where there were lateral canals that went all over the state.
So I mentioned that's commercial. There is a
Yep.
tourism point of view. I know
Yes.
you can rent an Erie Canal boat.
Yep.
We'll get to that in a second. But you can go on tours. I went on one at Father's Day in June, and I went to Rochester, and we went through to a lock and did that. Is that the main use of the locks now? Is more recreational and tourism?
Yes, back in 1995, I believe, New York State went all in on recreation. They created the Canal Recreation Way Commission and wrote a recreation way plan all about how to make this waterway more appealing and more usable for recreational traffic.
So that was obviously a day trip, or not even a day, it was 2 or 3 hours, a nice box lunch. You go up, you hear the song.
Yeah.
But along the way, we passed several rental boats.
Yep.
And so are those New York State rentals?
Nope,
They're
that's a
not.
private company that runs those.
And how much does it cost to rent a boat like that, do you know?
a couple $1,000.
Okay, for a couple days?
Yep.
And do they give you your own pilot, or you're the driver?
They teach you how.
They teach you how, okay.
Yeah.
Is Rochester the closest one for to go through a lock?
So to go through a lock, Rochester area, and then also the Herkimer area.
Okay.
They're kind of, well, from here, I suppose Rochester is much closer, but from Syracuse, they're kind of equidistant to go out to those two.
So funny you mentioned Syracuse. You're located across from, roughly across from the John Hughes State Tower building and
Yep.
the City Hall, on the
Yep.
back side of City Hall.
Used to be the front side of City Hall.
Front side of City Hall, but
Interesting fact.
how long has the museum been in existence?
Is it okay if I go back a little further?
Sure.
So the museum is in the 1850 Syracuse Waylock building. It's a building that was built in 1850, surprise, to weigh canal boats. It was
Okay.
built by New York State, basically like a weigh station on the Thruway today. The building lost its intended purpose in 1883 when New York State stopped charging a toll on the canal and became a dry dock where boats could pull in.
So, wait, excuse me.
Yes.
So New York stopped charging a toll on the canal,
Yes.
but they still do on a throughway they paid for.
Sure.
I digress. Go ahead.
So they stopped charging a toll in 1883 on the canal. So the building doesn't need to weigh boats to collect a toll. It becomes an office building. The New York State Department of Public Works, Department of Transportation are all based out of this building. They plan the current canal system out of this building. They plan the interstate system in Syracuse out of this building. And one of the last things they do in the planning of the interstate system is planning for the building to get knocked down. They were going to take it out. There's going to be a nice interchange right there in front of City Hall. They were all moving across the street to the Senator Hughes office building. And so the building was going to be knocked down. But two important groups heard about that. The New York State Canal Society and the Syracuse Junior League. And those two
The
got
ladies
together.
got involved.
Those two got together and they saved the building. And New York State gifted it to Onondaga County with the express purpose of it becoming a canal museum, which we've been since 1962.
So are you county employees?
We are not, but the county does still own the building.
Okay, so you are not-for-profit. You have
Correct.
your own board of directors. How
Yep.
big a staff do you have?
Right now, we've got 11 on staff, 7 of them full-time and 4 part-time.
And how large a budget do you have?
It's about $750,000.
And you're open 360 days a year?
Give or take.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how long have you both been there? I know you've been, I just said you were at the Seward House.
Yep.
That's how I first met you.
Yeah.
How long have you been there?
Be there 5 years in like 3
Next
days.
week. Yeah.
Okay, and where were you before?
I was at Chittenango Landing Canal Boat Museum.
Okay, so you're a canal guy.
Yeah.
You're just a
It's in his
history
blood.
Okay, all
Sure.
right.
At least was your drinking water, I don't know.
So I want to ask this question because I've been there most likely a dozen times, maybe half dozen times. If you haven't been there, it's a wonderful facility. But when you walk in, what do you see? What's at the Erie Canal Museum?
That's a good question. So when you walk in, we have an exhibit that kind of is a timeline of the canal. It's a pretty comprehensive exhibit that it went in 2015, so fairly new. So if you haven't been in the past decade, come on back. It'll look a little different.
And it's interactive.
It's interactive, yeah. It kind of begins with the story Derrick was telling of this idea of the canal, these European settlers that were like, wait a second, there's something about this, and goes through the construction and then talks a little bit about what life was like after the canal opened. Then we also have the historic Waylock building, which out in what we call the weigh chamber, where the boats used to get weighed. We have a full-size replica canal boat that you can board.
So that's not
and
an
explore.
actual boat, but you can climb onto it, so you can climb up onto the top. You can see
cannot
this.
climb up onto the top. That is.
Yeah, tell every 7-year-old
We
that.
put up a velvet rope recently.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Here's a hint. A 6-year-old can go through a velvet
Oh,
up below.
no.
You're shocked. You're stunned. I know.
That's terrible news.
But you can go on there so that you can
Get the
you can
feel.
but you can also see the spacing,
Yeah.
the size of what. And there are not fake people. There's display people in there.
Not anymore.
Oh, they're not. Okay. But there were. But
Yeah.
it gives you an idea of the size of that.
Yeah.
So that's not an original piece. That is. But is that where it sits? Is that part of the lock?
Yes, so that would have been where the boats were to get weighed. So
Okay.
if you look out of it's kind of like a glassed-in area. If you look out, you can see some recreated lock gates.
And you'll see a lot more different things once they get 81 done.
Whew, boy, will you.
Outside your windows.
Yeah.
So you go there, and then second floor.
Second floor, we call them little vignettes about like life in a canal town. So we've got a general store, a tavern, a little stage.
Well, the
and
tavern,
theater.
I happen to know who donated the tavern,
Yes.
the Bartolota brothers from
Bartolotas,
Auburn.
yeah.
There's a beautiful bar there.
Yep.
Is it ever used?
Oh, it is, yes.
It is.
If
Do
you
you
come for the opening of the gingerbread gallery, we use it for cocoa. So
Oh,
maybe that's a
okay.
little different than what it could traditionally be used for. But
And so what are your hours of operation?
we are open daily from 10 to 4.
Okay. And is there a fee to get in?
We have a suggested donation of $10.
Okay. And,
But-
any idea how many people come through your doors in a given year?
We have about 20,000 people who come through each year.
And we were talking beforehand, this is in the curriculum of 2nd, 4th, and 7th graders in New York.
Yes.
So do you get a lot of visits, or do you go to them?
It depends. We get around 2,000 kids come to the museum themselves. This year we are experimenting a bit more with going to schools because some are just too large of groups to kind of fit in the walls of the museum. So.
And what are you a research facility as well? Do people? I know. So I have the Canal packet here, which is your newsletter. I know there's some research in there, but if somebody, who would come to you for research, and for what type of research when they're coming?
Well, we get a lot of genealogists, people who want to trace their own family history. We help.
Are they connected to how would they be connected to the Erie Canal? Do they have lists of passengers?
We have some lists of passengers. Also, the state employed thousands of people on it. Plus, also all the canal boats had employees on them. Plus, people operated businesses on their banks. So there
And
are.
just on that point, especially in I don't know what the next to the Wheelock building is, where you have a video display, but a lot of pieces that people can see there and storyboards are about the history of Central New York, the growth of what an industrial site this was later in the century, but all started in 1817 through 1825. And is that a part of your mission, is to also do the commercial side?
I mean, a part of our mission is to really engage people in the story of the transformative effects of the Erie Canal on the past, present, and future. So the Erie Canal was truly a transformational waterway. That's kind of what we were talking about before, is it changed a lot of things. And it connected, it's a game I almost love to play. It's like 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. It's like, how can you connect the canal to something? Like, give me a random thing and let's see if we can trace the threads to figure out how the canal story is related to it.
Kevin Bacon's uncle-in-law lives in Auburn.
There we go.
Over by the Seward House.
And Auburn is a wonderful city here on Route 20, predates the Erie Canal, didn't get the Erie Canal, stayed a nice small city as opposed to Syracuse, which was tiny before the canal
So how was
opened.
property chosen? I know there are always critics of future generations. Well, you had to know who it was to get it. But was it literally trying to do a straight line from Buffalo? Because that would be the least expensive.
Right.
Or were there curvatures made out of there because somebody had an interest?
the original design of the
Nobody's
Erie.
going to sue you for
Oh,
that.
yeah, no.
Okay?
Derrick
Hey.
will talk to you about
Yeah.
old politics. Like he's,
The first canal is like shockingly devoid of most political patronage and corruption and stuff.
the first canal.
Yeah,
Because it had a
Right.
business interest that needed to get from point A to point B. And
they
make
were
money.
taking a huge gamble. They were
Right,
like, we
okay.
need to make this.
And they
we
didn't
need
know
to
what they
just
were
make it
doing.
work.
Okay.
They had no idea what they were doing.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
we just need to do the easiest thing we can as best we can.
That said, it did still have a few curves that may have been a little unnecessary. I'm thinking, I can't remember, I think it's Port Gibson out by Canandaigua. It
It
dips a
curved,
little
okay.
more in recognition of, I think it was Wayne County, or no, one of the counties needed a port,
Okay.
essentially. But
So, two things. One is, do you have a favorite story that nobody knows in this building about the Erie Canal that we should know? What's your favorite Erie Canal story?
my favorite, probably Erie Canal character is Thomas James. He was born enslaved in Canajoharie, New York in 1803 or 1804, we don't really know. But as they're building the canal through his hometown, he sees his opportunity to take his freedom, and he follows the just surveyed line of the canal all the way to Canada, crosses in, starts building the Welland Canal, actually. Does that for a year or two, but as Natalie kind of implied, it's not a fun gig. So he actually comes back to the new canal boom town of Rochester and gets a job in a canal side warehouse. First, he's sweeping the floors, doing various odds and ends, but over the winter when the canal's closed, he learned to read and write. By the end of his career there, he was in charge of the entire freight shipping operation, but his story didn't end there. He then became a minister in the AME Zion Church, helping build Rochester's, as well as founding Syracuse and Ithaca's AME Zion churches. Eventually, he has this fascinating life after he leaves New York, which I won't fully get into, but relevant to here is eventually he heads out to Massachusetts, meets a young man who had just escaped slavery. You've probably heard of him, Frederick Douglass. He starts saying, like, you should start speaking publicly, and Douglass, about a decade later, would come through here on a canal boat on his way to Rochester.
So those 6 degrees.
Yes.
I want to come back to the museum in a second, but I did mention MICRON at the beginning because it comes to mind. Has the discussion of MICRON in the last 18 months had an impact on the museum itself, on the Erie Canal Museum, or haven't you seen it yet?
Not that I know of. Like I can't say that it hasn't, but not an obvious one that we can pick out.
Have you seen an uptick? And I know part of it's troublesome because of COVID, and
Yeah.
through all of your numbers are you seeing an increase in numbers of people coming through the doors?
No, COVID makes things tricky. Also, the way we used to count people makes things tricky. So we're seeing interest. People are talking about the Erie Canal. That my Google alerts are frequent and common of the Erie Canal being talked about.
Have you gotten any money from MICRON yet?
Not yet.
Okay, but I'm sure
You
it's
let
on
them
it.
know. I'm sure the check is in the mail.
Okay, so
MICRON, if you're watching.
well, but there's a little bit of skepticism about MICRON, and will it get built?
Yeah.
And the last 10 days have not helped with Speaker Johnson being in town.
Yeah.
But Governor Clinton and that clique also had a problem. Is it going to be real? Do you see any historical parallels there, or are we too soon?
So I can't speak to MICRON. I don't know everything that's going on with MICRON. I know a little bit more about the Erie Canal, and something that we've been talking about at the museum more and more in the past several years is looking at the story in a more nuanced way. I think when people are talking about the Erie Canal moment, they're talking about the large economic boom that resulted from the canal being built. But that's only one piece of the canal story. When you look at the canal, you look at this unnatural waterway that's connecting two natural waterways, and what's the harm that might come from that. The invasive species that are now being able to travel more freely. You look at the land that was once belonged to indigenous people and is now, they say that we built a river through their house.
Right.
Like all these stories that are not so shining and positive. Not saying the canal didn't do wonderful things. It did. It absolutely did.
But there are two sides to every
But
story.
there's two sides to every story. And this MICRON or this Erie Canal moment, we don't know what that story's going to look like yet.
So originally we were trying to get you a couple months ago, but we're closer now. But I say closer now because in the next couple of weeks you have a gingerbread gallery that is opening up. What is that?
So this is the 39th year that we've done this.
Okay.
The first year was 1986, and it was a one-day event.
It is not now.
It is not one day. It is 7 weeks long.
Okay.
It will open up the week before Thanksgiving and run all the way through the new year.
So what is displayed?
Gingerbread houses made by wonderful community volunteers who may or may not be related to our host here. They are, we call them creations because they are not all houses. We get boats, we get locks, we get all sorts of canal-related things.
so-
Shrek.
We get
Well,
Shrek.
so I
yeah.
will say, so
it doesn't have to be canal-related.
because obviously you were at the Stewart House.
Yeah.
This is similar, not in the type of display, but like the quilt show is for the Schweinfurth.
Yeah.
The gingerbread gallery is for the Erie Canal Museum. You get a lot of walk-in just because of that, and you get to see. We were talking before. There was an Otto the Orange last year as part of a house.
Yeah.
I love the Addams Family one
Yeah.
going in there, but these are. Sometimes they're families, sometimes they're children. That's the one I'm familiar with.
Yeah.
And then there are confectioners.
Yes.
Who are professionals who do it. So how many exhibitors do you get?
So we get between, I'd say like around 40 is the safe number to say. We get around 40. The confectioners have to pay to enter, and then they compete for cash prizes. And they are really phenomenal and impressive
So
creations.
how about you have other categories like families and you have children
And then seniors.
and seniors.
Yeah.
Are they given prizes too, or just?
They get ribbons.
Ribbons,
Yep,
okay.
yep.
And so there's two types of judging. There's one that there are judges for.
Yep.
But I can go in there and vote for my favorite. If I
The
go
People's
in,
Choice, yep.
People's Choice. Who are the, not who they are, but what type of other judges do you have?
So the other judges, they're different each year,
Okay.
and we try to select at least one person who's familiar with baking,
Okay.
who can look at these and be like, "Wow, this is an
If
impressive."
you ever
feat."
have a tasting, oh, no, sorry.
You don't want to eat these
Yeah.
gingerbread. When we open the cases up at the end of the year, just the smell wafts out, and it's usually good. Last year there was one that did not smell
Okay.
good. It was very strange. But yeah, it's the community judges. Hopefully,
So one of the
somebody
reasons we were
can
going to have you a couple of weeks ago because the deadline was yesterday.
Yes.
So you have how many right now? scheduled?
47.
And when? So again, just before Thanksgiving.
Yep. The
opens
grand
up,
opening is on Black Friday,
and then you go until when?
the 12th of January, so all the way into the new
And
year.
is there a fee to come in, or is that
Yes.
to go to the gingerbread?
Yeah, so to get into the museum during the gingerbread gallery, it's $10 for adults, $7 for seniors, and $4 for children.
And it is
the
a-
members get a family pass, so you can join and become
Yes,
a
and
member
you
today.
can join as a Canal member and go to their website. My last question
Yeah.
for both of you. I'll start with you. Do you have a favorite item that you have on display or is in storage that you wish you could display?
My favorite item on display is probably our barn wall, because who's got a barn wall on display? We do. So it is a line barn wall that used to be on a barn and on a farm in Holly, New York. And it was a barn where mules would rest and wait their turn to lead a canal boat again. And their mule drivers carved things into this barn wall during that time that they were resting. And so we've got some good 19th century and a little bit of 20th and 21st century graffiti on this wall.
What's your favorite thing?
Mine would probably be a recipe book from the 1930s barge canal. Canal boat cook Oliver Wendell Petrie, he left that in a collection of his letters for us. Started investigating it before the pandemic. I actually got to talk to his daughter, who's still alive, which is pretty cool. But then during like the height of the pandemic, I ended up making a lot of those recipes for YouTube. You can still see them today as I attempt to cook. Also, then we ended up publishing part of it along with my book, Erie Eats, which is about the history of food on the canal. So it was
Cool. Nice
pretty cool
pitch,
thing.
by the way. Nice way of wrapping.
Yes.
And you can get that. There's a gift store in the front as you go.
You can even
Right.
do it online too.
Yeah.
Okay. So our guests have been Derrick Pratt, the Director of Education and Public Programs for the Erie Canal Museum, their Executive Director, Natalie Stenson. Terrific to have you back in the studio. Thank you for talking to us about the other MICRON moment just 200 years before. And we do encourage you to go to the Erie Canal Museum located in downtown Syracuse. It is worth the visit. It is one of those historic sites that we want you to know about. We'll be back on Tuesday with our regular program. City Councilor Terry Cuddy will be here for an Owasco Lake update and also talk about the litigation the City of Auburn is in with the state over the state of Owasco Lake. Then we'll have Cuyahoga County Public Health Director Kathleen Cuddy and Dr. Cassie Archer, the new Director of Community Health, in to talk about issues related to vaccines, lead poisoning, and early intervention for children. Next Thursday, we will have two back-to-back Inside Governments. Mayor Jimmy Giannantino will be in for a city update, and new Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Misty Slavic, will be in to give us a district update. If you have questions for them, you can send them to cozguytho@aol.com. I'm Guy Cosentino for Cuyahoga Community College. Hope you have a good evening, have a good rest of the week and weekend, and we'll see you back here in the studio on Tuesday. So, thank you. So,